Welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. My guest today, once again, is Kirby. Kirby and I just finished wrapping up Operation Phantom Shield on November 2nd, and we wanted to do a debrief on this event. I think that it has been one of the most successful events that we've had in the community, as far as I can remember, especially since we've been playing at Frontline. So it would be a good opportunity for us to sort of talk about some of the elements that we had planned, how they worked out on the field, and sort of all points in between to help potentially you, if you're thinking about organizing your own type of event, to sort of learn from our mistakes in a way, but also to learn from our successes. And I think there's a lot to be happy about. And feedback, has been pretty overwhelming so far.
Mm-hmm.
Just before we dive into it, I think it's worth mentioning that for anyone who's considering doing an event or running a game, coming up with your own scenario, I think one of the most important things that anyone can do is ask feedback. Ask for feedback from the people who attended. Because at the end of the day, really, you're not doing this for you unless you're getting paid money or whatever. But like for us, like we're not making money from these events. We're really making them happen for the community, right? And if that's your situation, if you're thinking about running new game modes at your field for the players you play with, or even running your own op or whatever that looks like, you have to remember that the people who are playing, they're your customers at the end of the day. And it's so important to ask them for their feedback about what went well, what they didn't like, all the points in between. And that can be really scary. It can be scary because you're putting a lot of your own sort of blood, sweat, and tears and money probably into running this kind of thing. And so it sucks to potentially hear negative things about your event. So it's putting yourself out there, but that's something that we take very seriously. It's something that we do after all of our events, and we really do try and improve on some of the things we've done in the past. And sometimes we do well, and sometimes we sort of miss the mark, or we forget about some things. So we'll get in all that we'll get through all that today. But before we dive into it, I just wanted to make sure, if you're thinking about doing this kind of stuff, getting feedback, so critical. So let's dive into Operation Phantom Shield. So Kirby, what were your initial thoughts, I guess, coming off the field, like once we called Index, which we called early, by the way, because one team won big time.
Yep.
But what were you feeling coming off that? Like, what was your immediate thought?
So my immediate thought was that I was just overall really happy, actually. And I think a part of that was that throughout the day, people like just walking by in conversation, like in their squads, or people coming down to the village of Robin Sage to come down and talk to us as the villagers. Just overall, there was always this just discussion of like, this event is so fun, and this is, and that everyone just seemed to be really, at least from the people who I got time to engage with, or just kind of like heard off the side, was that everyone had a really good time. And just comparing it to the previous operations. Now, I don't know if this was Operation Touchdown or Neon Sunrise, because I have no idea like who all the people in the community are, but just hearing that feedback and just kind of going like, yeah, you know what? Like the work that we put into this, I think was absolutely worth it. And it seemed that just from that feedback alone, and just hearing that sort of the verbal from everyone, was just kind of like, it just felt really good to just hear that it seemed that a majority of the people, and especially like newer people, just had a really good time. Yeah. And all in all, I was really impressed with the community and how they handled certain situations on the field. I'm sure we're going to end up talking about like the ceasefires that took place, and stuff like that. And I was just happy and thoroughly impressed with everyone that day who participated, both like staff and just players.
Yeah, and and a big shout out as well to Sergeant Mike Williams of the Canadian Armed Forces and his crew of people who were there to do a bit of a recruitment event for the CAF. They took the opportunity to walk around on the field, not just sort of sit around, which is normally what they would do, sort of set up a booth with a table so you can see, they had a helmet out there, they had a bunch of kit that you could interact with. That's usually what they do. And so Williams was telling me, well, I'm going to go and we're going to be a bit more dynamic. And I'm really, really glad that they did, because
Yeah.
as much as it was recruitment for them, it was also kind of recruitment for us, because hopefully they are people who will want to come and play airsoft, or at least engage with airsoft in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
So shout out to those guys, because that was super cool. And it was really, really funny how they just came down to the village of Robin Sage at at the onset of the game, and they were one of the first casualties. Like, one of the guys took a hit to the mask, and
Yep.
yeah, that sort of set off a whole chain of events, which we'll talk about in a sec. But yeah,
Yeah.
I have to agree. I think that there's a lot to be pleased about with how
Mm-hmm.
people engage with this, and also I think how seriously some players took it. I think we really leaned into the milsim element, and some of those sort of vanished later on as the game got a little crazy. But I know that on on the PRN team specifically, the IC and 2IC had said, I want everybody to be at the field at 8 a.m.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? 0800. And for the most part, by and large, the 10 team was there at 8 a.m., ready to receive their morning briefing, ready to
Mm-hmm.
hit the field, which I thought was pretty impressive,
Yeah.
especially given that, how do I put this? The community has not been sort of on when it comes to being on time, being ready for the event. And every single event we've done so far, we've had to delay the game start
Yeah.
because people weren't ready, and that was not a factor at this event at all. We actually
Mm-hmm.
we had the game start a half an hour later to allow for people to be to be on the field and all this kind of stuff. But I'm pretty sure that if we wanted to start the game at like 9:15, we definitely could have done that. Like, people were
Yeah.
ready to play. Few people showed up late, which happens, but like, I was really impressed with that as well.
Yeah, I mean, to see that we had almost 50% of the people who played at the pre-op briefing the night before, like,
Yeah.
that was really impressive. And I think people have just kind of like understood that, like, yeah, you know what? If I come the night before and if I do the briefing and if I do my chrono, I don't have to show up as early necessarily. I don't have to be there at 8 a.m. and sort out my gear. I can show up at 8:45 because all I got to do is put my vest on and hit the field.
Yeah. I think that, before we dive into the actual,
Yeah.
like, the progression of the event,
Yeah.
I think the one of the points of improvement for us looking at this is does have to do with how we organize
Yeah.
at the start, because we did the event chrono, and that was the pre-event chrono,
Mhm.
and that was great, and we had a safety brief, excellent.
Yeah.
And then we had the safety briefing the morning of, and chrono the morning of, people who can't attend, which is also fine.
Mhm.
But as we experienced on the day, people who showed up late, they didn't get a safety briefing.
Correct. Yeah.
Even people who showed up just too late for the actual safety briefing, which occurred at 9 a.m., so you had half an hour to get your stuff ready and hit the field and stuff. They also, like anyone who happened after that, they did not get a safety briefing, and we had no way of identifying who those players were. Now,
Mhm.
our safety briefing typically, in this time, did not really contain much gameplay information. It was really relegated to, these are your safety rules, these are your hit rules, and all this kind of stuff, and
Yeah.
the bleed out rules. So there were people on the field who didn't know that there was a 5-minute bleed out,
Yeah.
and we had no way of identifying those people before they hit the field. Unlike at larger milsims, for example, when we went to AMS, when you completed your safety briefing, you got an armband that said, AMS Iron Horse 6 or whatever, right?
Mhm.
And so I think that for next time, something we sort of discussed. I think we need armbands of some sort, maybe not the fancy like Gucci jelly bracelets that they have at Iron Horse, because they're not made of money,
Right.
but even just paper bracelets that they have for, like, shows, or like at,
Yeah.
whatever. Like, we could easily do that. And that way, before you get on the field, you just present your bracelet to show that you've gone a safety brief. And if you haven't, unfortunately, you get held back until the game starts, and then you can receive your safety briefing, and then you can take the field. It
Yeah.
sucks for those players, but I think that that's probably going to be the best solution for us.
Yeah. No, and I fully agree, because I mean, like, the realistic thing is that you you can't be on the field if you haven't gotten the safety brief,
Yeah.
because I mean, like, for example, you mentioned the 5-minute bleed out timer, and that was a really critical part of the game.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I got shot, I'm sitting there for 5 minutes, and then someone across the field gets shot, and they get up and go back and respawn. It's like, whoa, like, what just happened? And I
Yeah.
get that maybe some people forgot, like, that happens in like the heat of the moment, something new that we're not used to doing on a regular basis. But yeah, I think the bracelet system going forward will definitely be a huge thing for us to incorporate. And it's very easy, and I don't see it become like I don't see it being an issue. I just think it's going to help us be more organized, basically.
Yeah, and we've also been very lenient on camo, and I
Yeah,
think that that's okay. But I think next time we're also going to make sure that we just confirm that everybody,
yeah,
before you hit the field, like as you're coming on the field, we're gonna check your bracelet, we're
yeah,
gonna check your camo to make sure that it's correct for your faction, and if it's not, you're gonna get an armband, right, of the right
yeah,
color, and check if you have a bandage, right?
yeah,
Because from this point forward, for those of you who are listening, like you may think that we've been very generous, but we've been very generous giving bandages out. Like at AMS, you're required to bring 2 bandages and big boy rules. It's up to you to bring them. If you don't have them, that's too bad.
yeah,
So for us, we've been giving the bandages away, but now I think we've done this enough that we will have bandages for like renters or if you're really really screwed. But like what we found this time is we've been buying these bandages and team players are just cutting them so that they can have more for their teams, and it's like I wish they weren't doing that. And
yeah,
so, you know what? From this point forward, they're going to bring their own bandages. So when you show up to play, we're going to check your armband or your wristband to see that you've done a safety brief. We're going to
yeah.
check your camo and we're going to make sure that you have a bandage. And if you don't have those 3 things, then you're going to have to sort yourself out before you can take the field. I mean, fundamentally,
Yeah.
we're going to have to get players to arrange themselves.
Absolutely. And like I know like I know we gave the armband tape to the commanders,
Mm-hmm.
which technically speaking didn't seem like a terrible idea because it's like the commanders we wanted to give a lot of control to the commanders. And
Yeah.
we were kind of relying on them a lot to sort of help with staffing with their teams. And like now that I look back on it, it's not that I regret doing it, but I just feel that going forward, having staff, whether it's frontline or whoever the training or whoever the event coordinators are, basically just actually doing the taping ourselves. I think that will be the better approach going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of things that actually self-policed really well during the
Mhm.
event.
Yeah.
One of which, just as a side note, was I was running the respawns in the village, right?
Yeah.
For the tan team. I wasn't there every single time, but they were
Right.
still respawning because I had told them it's every 15 minutes on the 15 minute. So 9,
Hmm.
9:15, 9:30. And guess what? Big boy rules. Like they figured it out for themselves. They didn't
Yeah.
need to be told. Now, when I was there, I would remind them. But like generally speaking, one of the leadership team, so either the IC, the 2 IC, or one of the squad leaders or section leaders, I should say, they were there and they were looking at
Hmm.
their watch, be like, yeah, okay, we're responding or what have you. So, anyways,
Yeah.
I think those are things that small lessons. I wouldn't necessarily change the way that I did the respawns in the village. I think that was
Right.
fine, but the other stuff is we're definitely going to implement. But, anyways,
Yeah.
that being said, let's dive into the event. So, the
Hmm.
event we started at 09:30. We gave the tan team the opportunity to take the field early so that they could reinforce the village, which
Hmm.
they kind of did, but not as much as I expected, to be honest. But that's
Yeah.
that's another conversation. And then we also told the green team that they could, the ACM team, I should say, that they could take the field like sort of at any point, sort of 9 a.m. After. But the trick here was the PRN did not know that they had 2 spawn points.
Hmm.
So they wanted to make sure that all the PRN team were on the field before they started going onto the field themselves, so that the players who would stay back at the parking lot wouldn't get noticed, and sort of that wouldn't spread through the PRN. So they took the field at 09:30, and then we called StartX, and I wasn't actually on the field, like in the field when StartX was called, so I don't know exactly what happened, like with respect to the villagers, but I had given mistakenly the wrong Frago to the PRN commander, and they didn't notice either.
Right.
So the PRN, that Frago was actually for them to go look for a component in the woods.
Mm.
Thankfully, they did not find it,
Yeah.
which was great, because otherwise that could have really sort of screwed things up for the day. But regardless, I noticed my mistake rather really quickly, and I just retrieved it,
Hmm.
and then I was able to redeploy it. But what happened because you were in the village acting as not the leader, but like the grown up, because Jeremy goes a little rogue sometimes.
Yeah.
So sort of what happened like with the village right at the start?
So right at the start, it got almost chaotic right away because the PRN team, I guess I know they had a battle plan to basically try and get a line going along the main road of the field.
Mm-hmm.
And so they ended up getting online very quickly. But what happened was is that the ACM team just flooded down Blackhawk and started taking up positions along along the Robin Sage village. And the contact happened so fast that within 5 minutes, the CAF guys actually came down to visit us in the village, and they were there for minutes and were already caught in the crossfire. And that's when one of them actually got hit in the mask. And I was just like, wow, like what is happening? And then, of course, it just turned chaotic. Everyone was getting caught in the crossfire, but I was pretty blown away just by sort of how quickly the contact ended up going through that village. And it led to some pretty bad moments actually for both teams, but mostly PRN actually, because PRN player, while I was talking to one of the CAF guys after we finally got them to stop shooting through the village, I was just standing there chatting away. And this was within the first 15 minutes of game whistle. And we're just chatting away to the CAF guys, and all of a sudden, ding, I take one right to the goggle, and I'm just like, so I just just fall back on the ground dead, and the CAF guys are busted. And it was just like, okay, we're not even 15 minutes into this, and PRN, who was technically already not bad relations with Robin Sage, but not great, had just
Yeah.
basically sunk themselves to a flat zero. Like, hey, we do not like you. You just shot us already.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it was compounded by the fact that the first frago that the PRN commander would receive
Yeah.
would be to conduct a KLE, a key leader engagement, with the village leader, which, I mean, that village, didn't like you to begin with, and now they really don't
Yeah.
like you. So it's going to be a lot harder for you to accomplish that. And I was saying to some of the CAF guys, like, the PRN team, they don't know this yet, but
Mm-hmm.
they've just created a lot of trouble for themselves. And I was explaining, and they're like, "Oh my god, how are they
Yeah.
gonna, work their way out of that hole and all this kind of
Yeah.
situation?" And I know that eventually, like, I didn't. So I took to the field through the top of the field, and so I didn't
Okay.
see all this engagement later on. I made my way to the start of the to where the fob pineland was,
Mm-hmm.
and I could see like they were engaged. Like the green team ACM was using both of their spawns, and they were coming from
Yeah.
all sides, and that definitely took the tan team by surprise because they
Yeah.
were not expecting that. But their first fraggle was to locate some missile components, which they were able to do like almost immediately. Like I gave them
Wow.
the fraggle, and then probably like 10 minutes later, they're like, "Yeah, we got it. Yeah, we found it." And it's not like it was like super well hidden, but it was
Mm-hmm.
still hidden. They just found it, brought it back, and they had it. So that was that. We tried to do a fraggle basically every hour. Um, but at some point we had to take a break because I'm like, you guys are completing these way too quickly. Like
Yeah.
they were really really trucking along. Um, but yeah, I mean, also our field is not very big, so like it doesn't take a whole lot of time for people to move from one place to another.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not too surprised that there was contact immediately. So how did they actually sort of dig themselves out of that hole? Because I know that they conducted the KLE because their
Yeah.
first frago was to set up an LPOP, which they did, and then they reported on like the signs on the buildings, which was a great idea, by the way. I think
Yeah.
a lot of players actually like that for a couple of reasons. One, because it's cool or whatever. It was a cool mission. Some players said, having numbers on the buildings was useful because
Yeah.
I'm not super familiar with the field. And when people say like the jail, I have no idea. But if they say
Yeah.
I'm at, building Bravo Romeo 01, they're like, oh yeah, that's that one that says
Right.
BR01. So that I thought was a great idea.
Yeah.
So and at any event, a PRN did their LPOP thing. They reported back. And then I know they conducted a key leader engagement.
Mm-hmm.
How did that actually go down?
So it almost didn't. So obviously at this point PRN was in terrible relations with us, and what happened was is that Cal, I don't know if it was on purpose or not, but he had himself literally right next to Robin Sage. Like I could have reached out and shook his hand. He was just hiding behind a piece of cover, getting just peppered by the ACM forces. He's like, hey, he's like, I'm sorry for what happened earlier, because like Jeremy has us with our guns at this point, because like PRN's still shooting. We're not liking them too much. It's only 20 minutes in. and so Cal's just basically trying to sweet talk, and he's like, hey, like, I am so sorry. And he's just being shot at and just talking to us while tucked away. And Jeremy's like, okay, you know what? Kirby, I'm going to go out there, and you and Steph are going to get the ACM forces to stop shooting, and we are going to escort Cal in to hear what he has to say. And so we did it. I managed to just go out, and the ACM guys, they were really uneasy actually about us getting them to stop shooting at the PRN forces. And I heard a lot of whispers of like, should we just shoot them all? Should we just shoot? And like, I was just like, oh boy, this is going to go bad. And so Cal surrendered his gun to Jeremy very reluctantly. And we brought him in. We brought him into the hut, into my little hut of warmth. And he came in, and Cal played that role so well. Like, he nailed it, just because he, like, a lot of just being a very apologetic, but then also just realizing the fact that and we're being demanding. We're like, hey, okay, you know what? Because you did this, like, we want X, Y, Z. And he's like, okay, tell you what, I won't promise you X, Y, Z, but I'll give you A, B, C, which actually just benefits me and not really you at all. And maybe I'll give you X, Y, Z later on in this day. So he did a really good job actually of playing that. But yeah, they were just like, hey, you know, we'll give you some money. We're going to go execute the guy. Like, our laws that we have as PRN, we are actually to go back to our fob, and we're going to execute the guy who shot your local villager. And hopefully this will bring us to mutual peace. And you know Jeremy now, whenever someone's being executed, all about it.
Yes.
So they were able to, they got themselves, I wouldn't say completely out of the situation, but Cal did a phenomenal job of just like being like, you know what, like, I can't give you everything you want, because obviously like upper command wouldn't allow it.
Mm-hmm.
And he nailed it so well. So yeah, he definitely helped dig PRN out of a hole which they were in very early.
It's worth mentioning that Cal was the IC for the PRN forces,
Yes.
right? So, and it's not like he's not familiar with that as part of his job. So right. I think it's not super surprising. One of my disappointments, and it's not a big one from the event, is I wish that circumstances had been different, so that he could do what he had planned to do for the KLE, which was to bring himself and two younger players, right, one to act as a scribe to take all the notes, and one to act as the aide de camp, or like the second like just person, because that would have been a really cool experience for two new players. Unfortunately, given the atmosphere of the game at that time, there's no way that would have been possible. So that's unfortunately sometimes is the reality. Like, in my mind, I had an idea of how I wanted to go down. Didn't really go down that way, but that's a small regret. And I mean, it's not a controllable for me, so I'm not losing any sleep over it, right?
Yeah, and the thing about it is, and what was really surprising, of course, we're going to end up talking about, is, I mean, after we had that meeting with Cal and the PRN forces, that was pretty much it, because they couldn't get back to Robin Sage after that, because ACM formed such a good line on the road that PRN was stuck basically in the fob, and they just couldn't make it to us after that. I think they got to us once because they definitely got escorted, but
it was really interesting. And it's just a side note, while Cal, the IC, is having this KLE with the villagers of Robin Sage, he has his radio turned off. So his 2IC, ET, in Fob Pineland, is losing it because he doesn't know where Cal is. He can't raise him on comms, and he's basically just about to try and assemble a sortie to go to the village and retrieve him, because he doesn't know where his commander is. Now, Cal had told him, I'm going for a KLE, but like, how long are you going to be gone for? How long should we wait? Like, none of that was discussed. So like, at that point, they're like, okay, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And then finally Cal shows back up, and they're like, okay, fine.
Yeah.
But you raise one of the challenges of the field that we have, and sort of the situation overall, which is that the Fob Pineland is the village that we normally talk about. And it's very easy to defend that village, but it's pretty challenging to break out of it, right?
Yeah.
So you can hold that all day. But if you're trying to make movement out of there, you really need to be coordinated. You really need to think about how you're going to achieve that. And then essentially, how are you going to get to usable cover outside of the village and hold your ground? Because once the footholds are established, it was a challenge. And I think what I experienced from being at the respawn in the village is that we had set it up so that they had multiple buildings that they could spawn from, but
Mm-hmm.
nobody seemed to have read that in the op board, or nobody seemed to know about it or share that information. So the ACM team had a couple of DMRs, maybe even a bolt action in the sniper tower, and they were laying very effective fire.
Yeah.
I felt really bad for a guy who was at his respawn, and he said, "Can we respawn now?" And I said, "Yeah." And he stepped out of the building and immediately got hit in the dome by a BB. I was like, "You're in your grace period. Just get back in there and go back." I felt so bad because I told him to
Right.
come out and he got absolutely rocked. But
Oh
like
gosh.
they were in a really good position to put fire in there, and
Yeah.
that team wasn't necessarily utilizing all the different structures to be able to respawn to their advantage.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a variety of different reasons for why that would have happened, not least of which that, like I said, that didn't seem to read the op board, or they didn't seem to remember, which is one thing.
Yeah.
But also the green team was able to get into very good positions and just lock that down through for most of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that was the thing. It was like I look back at it now, and it's not that I look back and I regret it. I think having the two respawns was a great concept, and I think going forward, like looking at the size of the frontline field and just sort of like how basically the passageways through the frontline field work, is that I don't think I would ever do the two respawns again. And I just think for me, it's like I do like the idea of respawning on D-Day. I do actually like that concept more than spawning. Because like in the past, we've always done, I think, Blackhawk on one side and then Thunderdome on the other.
Yeah.
But I'd almost like to see the other corners done, just to see like what would happen. Like if you put one team spawning in D-Day and then one team spawning basically by the parking lot,
Mhm.
and sort of seeing how it goes fighting that way instead.
We've done that once before, and
Oh, did we?
you sort of run into the same. You run into the
Yeah,
same situation, right? Because the field is
yeah,
so small, your battle line gets drawn, and
that's
basically,
true.
ultimately, one team gets pushed into a corner, right?
Yeah,
The only time that doesn't happen actually is when you're on D-Day. It's very hard to push them back and
mm,
hold them into that corner because there's so much woods that you can use to
that's
maneuver and
true.
stuff, right?
Yeah,
But aside from that, like I think you're right though. I'm not necessarily sure if I would do the two respawns again. But one thing we did do after a while, when the PRN team was really getting sort of bogged down in Pineland, I told them, "Hey, we're giving you reinforcements from the road." And so
yeah,
basically, I took a whole crew of players, they're probably like 12 or 15 players, all the way to the road and respawned them there.
yeah.
And then when they respawned, they came back in, and that sort of shifted the balance of the event. So I think in future, that's a mechanic that we could apply for, like, hey, you've done this thing and you've
Mm-hmm.
now earned this respawn. And then maybe it's up to the commander's discretion on how and when they want to use it or what that looks like. But that I think is an effective thing. I mean, the enemy, you don't get the element of surprise. They kind of know that that's going to happen. But if you do it quickly enough, they're probably not going to all be able to respond, right?
Yeah. No, that's true. And
Yeah.
I remember from like previous operations, gosh, this must be like 8, 10 years ago from like some of the very first operations. I remember like there was one time where we had like the airstrikes,
Mhm.
and it was like, hey, like this team earned an airstrike. Here's the map. Like pick a grid, and we're gonna go put a smoke grenade there, and basically they have 30 seconds to get out of that area. Otherwise, like it's been airstriked and everyone there is dead.
Mhm.
And I think even just something like that can just help with like helping a team potentially get some breathing room. But now at the same time, and I hate to say it, but I mean, like there was one point where PRN was gifted probably the biggest window of opportunity to seize control of the field,
Mhm.
and they didn't. And I was so mind blown when that
Do
happened.
you want to talk about what happened for that one? Because this
Yeah.
is a story.
Yeah, so basically what happened was one of the villagers yet again was shot, but this time by ACM forces. And what happened was is that it was Steph that got shot, and I myself and Jeremy immediately turn around and go like, you literally just blatantly, because a guy was right in front of us, and he's like, you just blatantly shot a villager. What's going on? So Jeremy's like, yeah, you can kill this dude. Like, he just blatantly shot us. So I shot him, and then immediately a wall of ACM guys are there, and I'm like, well, I'm about to get blasted. And
Mm-hmm.
I did. I got shot up, just dropped in the village. Jeremy got shot. And at this point, I radioed you, and I'm like, hey, the entire village of Robin Sage is KIA
Yeah.
because we just got wiped. And but after this, we respawn. The ACM guys are kind of like, whoa, okay, like, we are so sorry, we are so sorry. And Jeremy went to town on these,
Yeah.
like, in character, and was just like, look what you've done. And anyway, so Parsons, the ACM commander, met us kind of partway in Blackhawk, because that's how far we had actually gone with this, like, sort of verbal engagement. And he said, I will come to your village. I'll come down. We'll have a conversation, because, like, everyone, like, it was basically turning to Robin Sage versus ACM for a good 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, Parsons came down, and basically Jeremy was like, I want every single soldier that you have in this village, and they are going to come down and one by one apologize to me. And first off, Parsons agreed to this, but what happened was he had one of the Terra guys bring down the guy who actually shot Steph, put him on his knees, took out a pistol, and shot him in the helmet. And we were just like, oh, okay. Like, just full on executed this guy in the village. And we're like, okay, so great, but that's not what you agreed to.
Yeah.
So we were like, well, we appreciate it. This wasn't the agreement. So it's like he was trying. He knew he shouldn't pull his forces off the field,
Mm-hmm.
but he agreed.
Yeah.
So about 15 minutes later, he actually brought every person who wasn't dead at the respawn. He brought his entire team of ACM to that village, and they all lined up one by one and started shaking Jeremy's hand, giving Jeremy their first name, last name, and just a heartfelt apology was what Jeremy
Yeah.
wanted from them all. And while this is happening, there is no ACM players on the field. They're either
Mm-hmm.
dead or they're in the village of Robin Sage.
Yeah.
And the PRN guys were lost because they seen this happening and they didn't know what to do. They were like, what's going on? Why is ACM there? But this was almost intentional, because we were like, okay, I knew that PRN was struggling. So
Mm-hmm.
I kind of worked with Jeremy on this idea of getting all the ACM forces in one mutual area to try and let PRN advance around the field. And we gave them almost 10 minutes to basically be like, you now own the field. Do what you want with it. And I hate to say it, but they did nothing. And
Yeah.
ACM walked right back out onto that field after doing the silliest thing that day and just acted like nothing
Kept
happened.
rolling. Yeah, kept rolling. It was really interesting. Like you were saying, it was interesting because, like, PRN ostensibly saw this happening,
Yeah.
but just didn't understand how to capitalize on it. And I think,
Yeah.
a lot of this comes down to something that we were talking about sort of privately beforehand. It's just sort of like the development level of players for these kinds of events, right?
Mhm.
And so if you haven't done an objective based game like that, and you also haven't been on the field for hours and hours at a time,
Yeah.
and all kinds of weird stuff is happening, you might see the players, they're all over there talking to the village. You're like, oh, they're all talking to the village. And you don't report that up to the chain. So now your IC doesn't know that that's a situation and go, okay, boys, we got to shift gears. Let's take ground. Let's do whatever,
Yeah.
right? That just doesn't materialize. But yeah, and what's really interesting is that the next frago that they had was a shared frago. They both had to go to the same place and locate that laptop. The ACM forces just went back to the field, found the laptop, and just brought it back immediately. Like, it's like, here it is. We're like, oh, okay, so that was okay. I did give them a hint on where it was because it was really well hidden.
It was, yeah.
Like, super, super well. There's not a chance they would have found it without some sort of hint. Or, I mean, possibly, but just very unlikely. But they found it immediately. Like, they found it right off the rip and then brought it back. And then at that point, we're looking at like basically the end game, because the last thing that they need to do now, they've got the flight launched like the tripod to mount the missile on, and
Mm-hmm.
they've got the launch stabilizer, aka sandbag, and they've got the missile flight computer with the laptop. And then
Yep.
the only thing they actually need is the missile munition itself, like the 5-foot missile that we had built. And that's the villagers have that, right? So we had to figure out, okay, well, firstly, when do we give this to them? Because they need it in the last hour. But as soon as they assemble that missile, basically it's going to be game over, right?
Yeah.
Because they have to put it in place, assemble it, defend it for 10 minutes. And if they succeed, right, or the timer doesn't reset or whatever, then that's it. That's game. So we can't
Yeah.
give it to them now. So what are we going to do? So in the interim, we just sort of let them keep playing,
Yeah.
because there's still tons of stuff on the field. One of the things that I had noticed, and you probably know the same, like they didn't actually look for cases. Like we had lots of cases hidden on the field, lots of other things hidden on the field, and players didn't really look for them. They found a few, but the rest of them they just didn't even bother to look for, right?
Yeah, and like that's where I had to sort of credit PRN kind of towards the end of the day. Like basically after afternoon, PRN actually they did an MRE transport to the village, which was super cool. They had found a case with just valuables like a watch and stuff inside of it that they were able to actually get to us in the village, and they did find one with a hard drive in it with a lock on it and stuff. So they did a pretty good job of that in the afternoon. But I mean, yeah, I mean ACM basically they weren't finding anything, and they ACM almost messed up with that missile transaction because they gave away all their money.
Mm-hmm.
Literally gave it away within the first 2 hours. And I was thinking to myself, I was counting the money that they gave me because I didn't ask for money; they just gave it to me, and I'm like, uh-oh. Like
Yeah.
you guys don't have a penny left. And they ended up just completing so many missions. They got us med supplies. They found two cases, both one with $1,000 and one I think with like 1,500 in it. So that was able to sort of help them get the missile at the end of the day. But like technically speaking, like that missile, I think we had agreed was supposed to cost them about $4,000.
Yeah.
And because they had found these two cases, done the med supplies and stuff with this, we kind of let it go and did give them the missile for basically 2,500 and some other things that they had done. But when they gave away that cash, that almost messed up their day.
Yeah, and we had a contingency plan, which was that if they don't have enough money, then they have to do this really hard mission. We had a couple of different missions planned,
Yeah.
but they had so much control of the field that none of those missions were difficult. Even
Yeah.
the most difficult one, like they
Yeah.
had to. I think the most difficult one was like they had to go to the Jeep on the D-Day field, which is in the open essentially, and go retrieve some like whatever was in the Jeep. They did that easily. They had no trouble doing that. And so it's like, okay, well, this is sort of where the end game of this event. And again, I think the limitations of the field really start to show in that you can, with this relatively small force, I mean, they had 25 players or 26 players and PRN had 25. Anyways, regardless, or no, it's the reverse. PRN had more players, but regardless, they were able to just hold the line. Right.
Yeah.
And they were able to hold a line basically all around Fob Pineland, which gave them unfettered access to whatever they needed to do on the field, such that by the time they received their final frago, which was to go and assemble the missile, I had given the PRN team their frago ahead of time because they basically was that frago was telling them, hey, ACM is about to assemble that missile. This is what you need to do. So I gave them lead time to start thinking about what they're going to do because they're going to know where ACM is going to be assembling the missile and this kind of stuff. And then I gave it to Parsons to get his team organized and put the missile in place and stuff. And between the time that they received the frago and that they had the missile in the correct place, 5 minutes had elapsed. And their objective was to assemble the missile and then defend it for 10 minutes while it calibrates. And that was it. So at 2 o'clock they got the Frago. At 2:05 they put the missile in the correct place, and then at 2:15 the game essentially was over. And what was interesting too is they assembled the missile in the correct place the first time in like 2 minutes, but that was in the woods, and I was like, you know what, these guys, they're doing fine.
Yeah.
Let's give them an additional challenge. Also, nobody can see my awesome missile from where it is in the woods, so I want it in the most obvious place on the field. And I'm really glad that I did that, because the feedback from the PRN players who were in the village was like, it was really cool to see that missile go up. Right?
Right.
Awesome.
I
But
love
yeah,
it.
so they put it in the right place. I got them to tear it down, build it somewhere else. They managed all of that within 5 minutes. So
Wow.
that was pretty wild. And that's why at that point I called Index, because I'm like, okay, well, I don't really want to belabor this. Like, they did this unimpeded.
Yep.
Not even a challenge. And I don't necessarily know that adding another 45 minutes onto this day is really going to change anything meaningful about the outcome, right?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
The villagers liked them well enough. They had recovered some of the information that they needed to recover. They had the missile. I mean, what else was there to do? I think for the PRN, I mean, they still did okay. Like, they still managed to complete some of their objective. But also, I mean, we haven't talked at all about ACM attacking the village, which they did numerous times, and also destroyed one of the structures in the village with their C4, right?
Yeah.
So they did a very, very good job at keeping the pressure on PRN for basically the entire day. But the feedback from the players is that they felt that it was tight. They felt like the game was close throughout the entire day, which is good feedback to get for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's just actually it's interesting to just look at like the numbers on the field, right? And just how we can sort of see how, like, we already know Frontline's a small field. And like, I love going to the open game and having like 30 people at the open, because you don't really notice when there's 30 people. But all of a sudden, when you have, 50 plus and it's 25, let's just say, like, you notice that.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I mean, like, honestly, good on the PRNs. I think the PRN had a lot of like bounce back moments. And once they did once they did the MRE transport, once they recovered the hard drive and got it back, I think that started to make them feel good and help boost the morale a little bit, because they were like, hey, you know what? We're making progress. Like, we made it to Robin's Age twice and got back this valuable intel. Like, things are starting to look up for us.
Yeah.
So
I think, if we switch gears to sort of like some of the challenges, I think one of the big ones is players are just not built right now for this long-term sort of engagement, right? Of, 5 hours. Like, anyone being on their feet and moving for multiple hours at a time is a challenge. Believe me, I know, like, I do this for fun, which is crazy, but here it is. 5 hours is a long time. And like, on the one hand, you might say, well, that's the same as like being in school for the day or being at work for the day, which is true. But also, like, you're a lot more active. Not everyone, certainly, but there's a lot to do. There's a lot of stimulation. It's tiring. You're lugging gear, all this kind of stuff. If you're not prepared for it, like many of these new players are not prepared for that, it is very tiring. And so if you bolt on, not only am I tired, but also we're not doing very well, or it feels like we're not doing well, or it feels like I'm getting hit like a million times, that can be a bit of a downer. And I didn't necessarily feel the down vibes, but I definitely felt the fatigue, like in the village in particular, or excuse me, in the Fob Pineland where I was running the respawns. You could see it. Like, some of the guys were just smoked after like 3 hours.
One of the things, like, I kind of think about it, I haven't verbalized it until this very moment, is when I used to play in Alberta, we used to, I mean, the field we played at was massive. I mean, it was over 100 acres in size. And the way that the owners ran that field when they did their mini ops, which were about 6 hours, is that we would play for 3 hours, and then they would actually take a break at noon. We'd have a 1 hour break, and then teams would go back on the field. There'd be another whistle blow hey, you got 60 minutes to come off, rest, have lunch. But at 1 o'clock, that whistle's going. So if you're not back on the field 1 o'clock, hey, your team is going to be down however many players. But it gave people sort of time to regain some energy and stuff. And like, I know people are going to go, oh, Milsim West and AMS, there's no breaks. Like, we play it's a break at your own risk type thing. But the thing is, like, I mean, the bit different is the people who are going to AMS, Like they go to that regularly, a lot of them. We're here, like what we talked about in the previous video, is that our community is so new that they're used to playing for 15 minutes and then we take basically a 15-minute break.
Yeah.
So for them to play for maybe 3 hours, we break for an hour, and then we go back on the field for another three. Maybe that makes sense going forward. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily agree or disagree. I think it's different approaches. I know
Yeah.
Frontline used to do it many years ago. I do think though we give a lot of respawn breaks, and I
We
think
do.
part of this is I think there's a management piece there from leadership to be like, guys, like take a break, take a breather,
Mhm.
get some get some food in you, sit around, like especially like in the context of like you're in Pineland, so there are structures you can just sit in if you want to,
Yeah.
or you're in the parking lot or whatever. Like just take a breather, right?
Yeah.
Don't take your goggles off. We had that happen, and it caused a ceasefire, which was something we can talk about in a second. But
Yep.
I do think that I think there's an opportunity here, just more sort of broadly, as the community sort of learns to play these events or learns to attend these events, because I do think there's a learning curve here that people just
Mhm.
haven't gotten yet. This is not an open game. And if you
Yes.
show up like it is an open game, you're gonna get rocked, right?
Yep.
Because it's just not how these games go. So I think as players learn to accommodate and deal with that and prepare for that,
Mhm.
I'm thinking it will get sort of better by itself without having to delve into breaking the immersion, so to speak. Like because we do so little of that as it is, that
Yeah.
guys, like you should be able to like just buckle down and get it done for 6 hours. Like it's not the end of the
Yep.
world.
Absolutely, and I
Yeah,
think a part of that also ties into like our open games, because I mean, like, the frontline staff, the refs. I think this year we seen, especially like getting closer to the event. I thought the refs did a great job this year of just like bouncing us on the field,
yeah, agree.
constantly. Like they were like, "Hey, on the field, okay, reload your mags on the field." But I think if hopefully next year is that seeing more longer scale objective games during the opens, I think will also just help people in general. Because I mean, different for yourself. I mean, like you're an avid runner, so like you're building up that cardio. But I mean, if you got guys who are their only exercise basically is coming out to airsoft on a Saturday,
Yeah,
I mean, if they play a 5 minute TDM and then they're sitting in the save zone for 15, that doesn't help. But
yeah, absolutely.
if they play a 30-minute rush game or whatever we're playing, capture the flag, whatever, for 30 minutes, and then we take a 10-minute break, not even, and then we're back out for another 30-minute game, I think that will start help the community sort of be better at going for longer periods of time. But that's
Yeah,
something for that's something for the frontline refs and something for us to look at next year. And yeah.
yeah, and I do think there's a piece here around like players also like understanding, like you know what, like as well, it's up to you to police yourself. Like I know
Mm-hmm.
on the ACM team there was a guy who basically just burned himself out in the first 30 minutes, and John, who was the 2IC for ACM, had to pull him off the field, be like, hey, you need some Gatorade, you need to go sit down now because you're
Yeah.
you're loopy, right? The guy
Wow.
was completely gone, like dehydrated, like just overheated. He was carrying so much kit, like all this kind of stuff. And
Crazy.
so I was checking on him. I was like, "Hey, are you okay?" He's like, "Yeah, I just need a minute." And I was like, "Yeah, that's cool. Just take it easy." So a lot of that too comes down to you policing yourself and
Mm-hmm.
understanding what your limits are. And I think as we continue to do that, and as we have players who continue to also support other players and coach them a little bit, I think that's going to be helpful. I want to come back to the ceasefires too, because we had two. This was the first time at
Yes.
any of our events that we've actually had to use like our real world ceasefire, like no duff protocol.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sort of waffling as to whether I want to keep calling it ceasefire or go back to no duff or whatever. But regardless, there were two incidents. One, and then you witnessed one of them, or you were part of one of them,
Yes.
and then the other one was I'll let you talk about that one. But the first one that happened, one of the PRN players was going through the woods basically, and he came up to what turned out to be the ACM, one of the respawns, and the players were just chilling and didn't have their iPro on. And we had
Oh.
told them, you cannot take your iPro off on the field. There are no safe zone on the field. So as soon as ET, the guy who saw this, he calls out like, "Hey, ceasefire, blind man, like put your goggles on, etc."
Yeah.
And what had happened was that player who had his goggles off, their goggles had like failed or something, and the ref had gone to go get him a mask, right?
Oh.
But it's like you should be covering your face, you should be taking
Mm-hmm.
some sort of measure, right?
Yeah.
So it turns out in this case, thankfully no one was hurt, but then you had one where someone was hurt, right?
Yes. Yeah. So actually we had that ceasefire for the iPro, which took quite a while to resolve, and there was actually a lot of confusion because
Yeah.
people weren't sure if it was active or not. It got handled, which was great. And we went back into our positions, we blew the whistle, and I think it was maybe 2 minutes later,
Yeah.
and you just hear the ceasefire again. We're like, whoa, like was the issue not resolved? And immediately got over the radio that a PRN player had gotten hurt in the village. So I ran up to grab Michelle. Actually, I left a radio with Michelle, who was our medic. My second radio I just gave to her, and she was listening to our radios the whole time. So she was actually already like had the first aid kit, mask on. She was actually met me part way, and we ran down to the village, and yeah, we got down there, and actually one of the PRN players, Stafford, actually is a first responder, so he was already administering some aid to the individual who was injured. But yeah, this was one of the issues that we had was the night before it had poured rain,
Mm-hmm.
and it did make the field wet, sloppy. And the thing with the village is because of all the paintballs and paint and stuff, these buildings are really slippery on the inside.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't go in them most times because you're too busy sliding. And unfortunately, the PRN player did take a pretty good spill. They were able to like manipulate their body mid fall and sort of took all their weight onto their wrist versus kind of going face first. But yeah, I mean they left the field that day with a pretty sore wrist and a banged up knee. Speaking of knees, of course, Matt also had a bit of a knee injury as well.
Yeah.
We didn't have a ceasefire for it. He didn't deem it was anything too serious,
Yeah.
but
Just scraped up his knee.
yeah, just scraped up his knee. And
But I think,
but
what was really cool about all those situations is despite the confusion,
mhm.
people all took it very seriously and all did what
Yes,
they were supposed to do. Like we had been very
yes,
clear, hey, if this happens, if you call a ceasefire, you have to repeat it, you safety your replica, and you just wait. Right.
yeah,
And so, yeah, you had players like bouncing around, being like, hey, what's going on? What's going on?
yeah,
What's going on? But nobody was like, oh, I'm going to use this opportunity to like move or do whatever. Like people were just
right,
sort of doing what they were supposed to do, staying where they were put.
yeah,
And ultimately, I was saying to the CAF guys who were there too, I'm like, two in one event, we haven't had one at all
yeah.
since we started doing these events, and since you guys showed up. So maybe it was their fault. I don't know. But I'm just kidding. But yeah, so, and I think, kudos to all the players for actually doing
hmm
what they were supposed to do. I think that response was really well. I think maybe we'll change it back to no duff just for clarity. I don't really know, but ultimately, I'm just glad nobody got seriously hurt. I
Yeah.
know that PRN player was okay. They were still they left that day, but they didn't leave the field. Like, well, they left the field, but they were still stuck around. They're in the pictures and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
So
actually,
that
they,
was
they
great.
actually went back down on the field and played for about another hour, and then they went off the field and I think went up and just basically hung out with Michelle for the rest of the day. So they
Yeah,
stuck around for all the photos and the raffles and stuff, which I'm sure you're going to talk about here in
yeah,
just a few moments. But yeah, no, it was just really good spirits, and like you said, like the community handled it very well, which I was very happy because again, like we had a lot of renters, we had a lot of new people, and
hmm
again, people missed the briefing. But yeah, everyone handled it super well, which was awesome to see.
yeah. I think, just a couple of quick other points of things that worked well that, you know, are worth mentioning. Like, again, for people who are listening, maybe you're considering doing this. I think the feedback on the replica classes that we use, so like
hmm
SSW, DMR, rifle, all that stuff, 100% positive feedback on that, and especially in the survey, everyone wants to keep using it. Same thing for the medic and buddy aid system that we use, that combination. Everybody likes that. The only thing we will do in future is probably give more medics. Players found that there weren't enough medics this time around. That's an easy fix. We did one medic per 10 players. We could do one medic per 6 players or 8 players, like 3 or
Yeah,
4
so I
medics.
actually heard ACM had no medics. Yeah, apparently both their medics didn't show up. So someone had, I don't know, I have no idea, but one of the ACM players at one point was dead in Robin's Age, and he had mentioned to us that he was like, "Oh, he's like, are you guys medics?" And we're like, "We can apply buddy aids." And he's like, oh, any chance I can get a medic? Because we don't have any. So I buddy aid him because ACM was at good terms with us at the time.
Hmm.
And I'm like, what do you mean you have no medics? I'm just curious. He said, oh, our two medics just didn't show up today. And I'm like, oh, like, okay. And
Give
then he
it to
just ran off.
somebody else.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I said. I was like, did your commander reassign anyone? He's like, oh.
That's the first I heard of that.
Okay.
I did hear that from a few people that, you know what, like it was hard to get a medic, or the
Right.
medics that felt that it was hard to restock their bandages. So we've got a
Mm,
plan for that. But
yep.
I think one, typically at, at any big Milsim, you have one per squad. But like
Yep.
for us, our squads are going to be smaller because our community is smaller. So squads are like 5 players, 6 players, 8 players, right?
Yeah.
So the one per squad makes sense, but that's probably not one for 10. It's probably some lower numbers. So we'll play
Right.
with that and figure it out
Absolutely.
to get the team set up. I think we had a little bit of confusion as well on team camo, which I mentioned before. So both uh, the ACM and PRN team had players in multicam, even though multicam was only really approved for PRN, and so the ACM guys should have a bandage. But if you have multicam that looks a little bit more green, then maybe that's okay. So again, that's the kind of thing that we want to make sure that we're looking at players' camos before they hit the field to say, hey, do you need an armband or do you not need an armband?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there's always workarounds with that. And
Yeah. And
yeah.
I think the last point that I want to make before we talk about like the raffle and stuff too, which is, super cool, is just one piece of feedback that we got was that, oh, there wasn't enough for me to do. I was sat around in, waiting for stuff and not doing anything, etc. And this ties back to sort of the development level of the community with respect to these events. But like at these types of objective based games, like you need to be responsible in a certain way for your own enjoyment. And if you find that you're sitting somewhere and you're bored and you don't understand why you're doing it, then you have a command structure that is more than willing, right, to give you another assignment, put you somewhere else, make sure, because their job is as much to make sure as you're having fun as yours is, but they
Mm-hmm.
can't know if you're not having fun if you don't talk to them. So there's a bit of a responsibility for players to be entrepreneurial with respect to what they want to do on the field. We had one player who
Yeah.
sat in the two-story basically all day long, just sniping, and he had the time of his life,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
He loved it. He was like, that's the best thing I've ever done at airsoft. Just being yeah, great, awesome. That's what you want to do. This is
Yeah.
wicked. For another player, that might have been super, super boring. So there's a give and take here where, yeah, sometimes, you need to hold an objective for the mission. But then
Yep.
other times, if you don't know why you're doing that, then you kind of have to either find out, okay, why is it that I'm doing this? And maybe be like, hey, can I do something else, Chief? Because I can't, not Chief, the guy Chief, but just
Yeah.
in general.
Yeah.
Like, maybe there's something else I can do, right? When we played at AMS Iron Horse, we were in that tunnel for 2.5 hours, right? But we knew why we were there. Yeah, is
Right.
it boring? It wasn't, the thrill of my lifetime. Certainly not. But we knew what we were accomplishing by doing that, and that can
Right.
often be enough to be like, okay, well, this sucks, but that's fine.
Yeah.
Versus this sucks and it sucks. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I think we had a lot of stuff planned. There was so many things for players to interact with that if players were like, oh man, I don't have enough to do, it's kind of like, okay, well, at some point, did you ask someone else, like, hey, is there something
Mm-hmm.
else I can do? Because I'm finding it boring. And at that point, people will help you out. So I think,
Yeah.
one of the things I'm considering doing, just as a side note, is just preparing a video that talks about like, hey, are you a beginner at these types of events? Here are a couple of things you want to keep in mind, because I think that might be helpful for people in our community and maybe the
Yeah.
community, the airsoft community at large, to demystify around some of this kind of stuff. But anyway, that's those are just sort of the things that I think we can do better. But again, that's not saying that this event was bad. There's always opportunities for
Oh.
improvement, and I think those are all pretty reasonable and manageable, right? They're part of our controllables. So
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, like, we learn from the feedback, and some things we can do, and some things we can't do,
yeah,
and that's how things go. Like, I mean, all feedback is appreciated, and that's the thing is like you have to take all feedback. Some of the negative stuff you take with a grain of salt, and you go, okay, like, how can I take something positive from it?
yeah,
But next year we'll see what 2025 brings, and yes, like obviously we're going to use the feedback to implement newer things into the future events and improve things, of course.
Mhm.
And there will just be some things that we can't change because we don't have control over that. But ultimately we use the feedback, and we always have. I mean, you and Pat have done an amazing job of listening to the feedback over the years, and things happen from the feedback.
Yeah.
Good
And
things.
and the thing is, sometimes it doesn't. Like people had told us before that they needed more medics. This was told last time. And to be
Hmm.
honest, that didn't really factor in when we were talking about, I was talking to you about doing these rules and stuff. I'd slipped my mind that people had said, hey, we should have more medics. I'm
Yeah.
not gonna forget this time. But I think that, that's something we could have done from last time,
Right.
improve on that. But it's a process. One of the things we definitely did improve on was the raffle. This was the first time
Yeah.
we did a raffle, and that was super exciting. I mean, I was so thrilled for our raffle sponsors at Andy's Airsoft and Flamingo Custom Works for giving us prizes. The
Hmm.
Flamingo Custom Works prize is so funny because, and I actually wrote the owners and I told them that this had happened because I thought it was
Gosh.
so funny. One player before the raffle said, "Hey, where can we buy these grenades? If I don't win one, can we buy these grenades?" And I said,
Yep.
"Yeah, it's on the Flamingo Custom Works website. They're $40 or whatever it is." And they're like, "Okay, cool. Well, fingers crossed." And what do you know? Kirby draws that player's name from the raffle bucket.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
just love how the irony of who it was and the fact that I drew his name. I was just like, ah, and like everyone's just yelling rigged, rigged.
yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah, and I think the top prize for us was a replica. It was an
Yeah,
EMG Mark 18 SOP mod, like Colt licensed situation. It's like a $500 Canadian replica. It's a nice piece of kit.
it is.
And it was won by someone who's relatively new to the community. I think
Yeah.
I've never seen that player. I don't think before this event. So yeah,
Well,
I was
what
I
was
was
really cool, I don't know if you
thrilled.
knew or not, but his replica actually broke during the event.
No way.
Yeah, so his broke or went down, whatever happened, and that's why all the guys who were on his team were like, "Oh yes, you have a new gun." Because like his actually went down, whatever happened, something broke. I remember hearing everyone talk about it in like the Discord and stuff like that, and they were like, "A better person couldn't have won." I mean, someone who was renting had won, that would have been pretty cool too.
Yeah,
But for someone who literally like had their replica go down because it was damaged,
yeah.
and then to win that, I was just like, "Yes."
Yeah, it felt amazing to be able to bring a little bit of joy at the end of the game to different players. We
Hmm.
had patches that we threw out, we had stickers, we had like barrel bags, we had BBs, and then we had the grenades, and then eventually that replica. And like it was just a really cool way to cap off a really fun day and a
Yeah,
really strong season, right? Because
yeah.
fundamentally, this is the end of the season for us. Like we
It
might have a couple more games at the outdoor while the weather is good, etc. We'll see how all that works, but sort of this is the end of the outdoor season.
hmm.
And yeah, it was just a very positive way to end the day, just with a little bit of laughter, a little bit of joy, and just a couple
Yeah.
people like being over the moon, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to be really exciting to see what next what next season brings, cuz I mean just seeing where the community went this year, I'm really hoping that we do see most, if not all, of these folks come back. I really think we will. I mean, like all the Terra guys. I mean, big shout out to them. They were awesome this year
Huge
to get to
shout out,
rock the
yeah.
field with. The Wolfpack guys were coming together this year as well. So I'm super, super stoked to see them and everyone else, of course, who isn't on the team, just come back next year and just bring their friends to the field and stuff. So it's going to be, I think it's going to be really good, and I'm hoping we'll break some more records next season with numbers for the events.
Definitely hoping so. Well, listen, Kirby, thanks so much for being on today. It's always
Yeah.
great to have a chat with you.
Yeah, that's awesome to be here. So yeah, maybe you'll see me again in the future. Maybe not. We'll see.
Definitely, guys. And guys, thank you so much for listening. That's all we've got for you this week. We will talk to you next week. Take care.